Hi, my name's Justin, and if you're like me, you're always looking for a project you're never going to finish. Um, Functional works of art, of working art. Come this way. I got projects all over. I was looking for another one, but I think I finally finished one. And I wanted to make this video to help others maybe go through the Kohler Courage Killer Crack issue. I've seen a lot of other videos. Guys are doing really well. I don't want to take away from anything that you're doing, but I wanted to share my take on it, at least with what I saw with this particular motor. As you know, if you're looking this up, the Kohler Courage single cylinders have a propensity for cracking right along here. There's lots of ways to deal with this. I've seen the C-clamp, the JB weld. This I picked up. The intention was to help my boys. They wanted to kind of grow their lawn mowing business a little bit, and so I diagnosed a couple things, got it running. The evening I brought it home. Obviously you pick these up and they've got tons of oil leaks. So at first it's tough to really get to the nitty gritty of that crack. Valve cover leaks common, closure plate leaks common. So when I addressed those issues and adjusted the valves, that's when I discovered the crack. I had initially believed that perhaps because the seller of this was honest. I thought this motor was junk, and for all intents and purposes it was. And back in the day when I was a small engine tech, I'd seen a few of these throw a rod, so I kind of expected to have to go into the motor. But what I wanted to share was the dowel pins on these. When I pulled this off, and that should have been my first clue, was down in the block. You could see where that dowel pin had wiggled, which should have been my first clue. And I also noticed that along this edge of the block, as you can see over here, it's fairly flush. And along here, it was about a millimeter and a half off, all the way along this edge. So there's a dowel pin on the front and the back, and basically they locate that plate. And as you've probably researched or saw in the other videos, these bolts, they get loose, and that as that closure plate walks, it's allowing that pin to move back in place, and this whole thing starts cocking back and forth. Now on the other side of this, there was a wear pattern, so that crank was moving inside the block back and forth, and that should have been my second clue, because it wasn't uniform all the way across on the thrust bushing. So that crack that happened here, I checked it out. These guys were using the clamps. I love that idea. Some guys were just using JB weld, and I think maybe for this motor the JB weld wasn't quite enough. And when I let it set and everything, other things happened. Had a neighbor come over and chat me up and had a question about the car, and I walked away, and JB weld started having an issue. So I took it back out, and I actually, the second time, I pulled the motor completely out so I could set it upright. The next thing that I did, when I realized that this block, I had it come together, but I was thinking to myself, what's causing this to spread apart and cause this dowel pin to walk inside the block? Well, I realized that the holes for this closure plate are 10 millimeter, and the bolts, the factory bolts, are 8. So that gives you basically a 2 millimeters of play that this thing can actually have. And you've got a a fracture in the block, that means that you've got a lot less stability. So I tried to think of a few things that I could, you know, I thought, well, what if I drilled this out, took out the pin, drilled it out, put a bigger pin? Would that be enough? And I just didn't think it would. But hollow dowel pins, very common in a lot of vehicles for timing covers, valve covers, things like that, help, you know, heads. But you know, machining the block to accept a few hollow dowel pins was excessive. So what I did was I actually I went down to O'Reilly's, which is one of our auto parts stores. I got some exhaust manifold bolts that came with some lock nuts. So in the places where that wouldn't allow me to put them in, I went ahead and used the factory bolts, but I cleaned up the ends, and I stuck this tube. It's a 5/16 inside diameter, and it's just about, it fills that couple millimeters of gap between the hole that's in the closure plate, and these are shanked, so that gives a little bit more, you know, better fit. And I left just a little bit of this out, so when this clamped down, we would kind of expand a little bit, or force it, you know, together. And I started with the ones that I could get, that I wasn't going to be able to put the studs in. There's a couple back here along the edge there, and I marked them individually. I did one at a time, and I stuck them in the hole, and I just turned this against the machined edge, and it cut a line, took it to the little chop saw, cut it off, cleaned up the ends, and these fit perfect inside there, you know, just like that. So, but the first tube I tried didn't quite fit. So you may if you do this, you may have to, you know, test fit a couple of them. But these are 8mm, I think, by 1.25, and then so I put those in, and then I started with, this is the position, you know, above the crack. I started kind of in these two on either side of the crack, and I started making basically the bushing spacer, if you will, and just did them one on each side. And as I did that, I saw the crack in the block come back together without the clamp, and then I went ahead and used the clamp to kind of help bring it together. And I just did it back and forth. I didn't tighten these down. I did, you know, get them just to where they would kind of hold it in place while I was checking everything out, and I just did that back and forth. Once I had them all in there, I went ahead and you know, obviously gasket material, if you guys are going to use gasket. I used it's an anaerobic sealer. It's a little different than maybe what you guys are normally used to. I've used it on tractors, lawnmowers, small engines, all kinds of stuff for years. Works great. But you know, use what you're comfortable with and what you know you want to try. But that brought that together, and with the clamp, I saw that all this started lining up pretty good. Turned it a couple times, you know, didn't hear any noises or anything. Checked everything else out, and then I took a die grinder. I relieved the block where the crack was, and again, this was out of the block. I cleaned up the areas. At the end of the crack, I did drill a small hole. I did hear some people talk about that, and I went ahead and filled it in. I used the high strength steel filled that does high temperature too. So I've ran this a couple times already. The purpose of this is to see whether or not I can take that clamp off. There was one other thing that I tried, but to make it work, I didn't have a left-hand tap. So I was going to try a turnbuckle from here to here. Now I was able to make a turnbuckle. Unfortunately, one end was not strong enough to really hold that and keep that pressure. I would have had to go up one more size. I don't have a left-hand tap to make the other end of the turnbuckle. So that's another thought if somebody out there, you know, wants to give that a shot. But you know, sink or swim, we're gonna start this up. Again, I've run it just like it is. It runs, and I'm gonna take the clamp off and see if that's enough to make that work. That might help some other guys out. Now, like I said, some guys, the crack might be worse than others. You may want to leave that clamp on there. I know some guys, the crack, they catch it early. This might be a good stopgap for crack that's early. So let's give it a shot. Fire it up, take the clamp off. I think the results might be very positive. So if this helps somebody, you know, that can catch a crack early and to repair their block with, you know, simple parts, I hope this helps, because, you know, there's a ton of these motors out there. These mowers are super cheap. You know, I think it was $10 for the stud kit and $10 or so for 5/16. But I think I got a foot long or 18 inches. So anyways, that's my take on the Kohler Courage Killer Crack. Thanks.